In the news tonight, His Majesty the King meets with leaders and representatives of the World Orthodox Churches in Jordan to convene a historic meeting and hold a prayer for peace at the baptism sites. Rival Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas agree on the makeup of a national unity government, and the Palestinian president will make a formal announcement of the new government later this week. And Egypt's presidential election was extended by a day in an effort to boost lower than expected turnout that threatened to undermine the credibility of front-runner Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Heads and representatives of the World Orthodox Churches from 7 states are congregated in Jordan to hold a historic assembly at the baptism site. His Majesty King Abdullah met with the delegation representing Orthodox Russia, Georgia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Cyprus and Finland, who said they have come to hold a prayer for peace.
The King described the past few days as memorable and historic, after Jordan hosted Pope Francis and now the leaders of the Orthodox Church, and offered his support to their efforts for peace and preserving the sanctity of holy sites, especially in Jerusalem.
I think this has been a very memorable and historic few days, I think, for all of us, and specifically for Jordan. And your meeting at the Baptist site for peace, I think, has tremendous historic importance for all of us. These past few days, I think, has been a message of coexistence and tolerance that I think has been the goal of His late Majesty King Hussein, my goal, and I think the goal of all of us here, to unite as brothers, but also, I think, in uniting Jerusalem and defending the holy sites. So I'm delighted to have you here. And again, I think the challenges that Jerusalem faces, especially from my point of view, the challenges of all the churches, it is my mission to work with my brothers here to strengthen your presence and to strengthen the communities, not only in the Middle East, but specifically in the West Bank and Jerusalem. So in that capacity, as a custodian and as your brother in Jerusalem and its holy sites, you have my full support.
Deliberations by the Orthodox Church leaders will focus on the Holy Land and the challenges faced by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. To them, the meeting at the River Jordan symbolizes the World Orthodox Church's support to the kingdom's political position, as well as its diplomatic efforts, and sheds light on the holiness of the baptism site. The meeting convened upon invitation by Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilus III. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem places particular importance on its role in peacemaking and achieving a just and comprehensive peace that guarantees human rights.
We came here in order to pray for peace and reconciliation for our region and for the whole world, but primarily for our region, because it is this land here, the Holy Land, and Jordan as well, is the cradle of peace, the cradle of reconciliation, the cradle of coexistence and mutual respect, and a place that everybody worship God without any problem.
The leaders and representatives held a service late this afternoon, attended by His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed, advisor to His Majesty the King for Cultural and Religious Affairs, a number of senior officials and members of the Christian community. the Pope's pilgrimage to the Holy Land beginning in Jordan and the Orthodox Church leaders' historic meeting here assert the kingdom's model of coexistence and harmony between cultures and faith, and highlight the religious significance of the baptism sites as a destination for Christians from across the globe. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
Separately, His Majesty received at Al Husseiniya, Pakistan's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Rashad Mahmood, and his accompanying delegation. The meeting dealt with military cooperation between Jordan and Pakistan. Army Chief General Mish'al Zebin also met with the Pakistani delegation at the Armed Forces headquarters, where General Rashad Mahmood was accorded an official welcome ceremony, complete with guards of honor. In the presence of His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Al Hussein, Zebin and the delegation discussed ways of furthering coordination and cooperation between the two countries' armed forces. The meeting also reviewed key activities taking place during the Eager Lion 2014 drill, held for the 4th time here in Jordan this year with the participation of Pakistan as well as a number of brotherly and friendly states. Eager Lion kicked off on Sunday with the participation of 22 countries and continues until June the 10th. In the most significant step yet toward healing the 7-year rift, Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas agreed on the makeup of a national unity government. The group said they decided on a list of independent technocrat ministers who will run government, pending national polls in at least 6 months. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will make a formal announcement of the new government later this week. Speaking at a news conference in the Gaza Strip, Fatah official Azzam al-Ahmad said the viewpoints of both sides will be presented to Abbas to give his final decision in the government lineup. Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh said Palestinian reconciliation will not be an alternative to resistance, but rather it aims to unite the Palestinian people against the enemy. The two factions agreed that current Prime Minister Rami al-Hamdallah, a former university president picked by President Mahmoud Abbas, will lead the new cabinet. A team of international experts investigating the alleged use of chlorine in Syria were abducted as they tried to visit a town where alleged chlorine gas attacks have recently been reported. But the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, said the members of the fact-finding mission were safe and returned to base. Earlier, the Syrian state television announced that 2 cars were seized by terrorist groups carrying 11 people, 5 of them Syrian drivers and 6 from the fact-finding mission, while on their way to Kfar Zaita. 1 car was blown up, forcing the convoy to turn back. OPCW inspectors investigating earlier allegations of chemical weapon use in Syria were fired at by snipers, and shells and rockets landed near their hotels. With a lower than expected turnout on the second day of presidential election in Egypt, the government said it is extending the vote for a 3rd day. Earlier, the Justice Ministry warned Egyptians who do not vote that they would be fined. And in another move to boost the numbers at polling stations, train fares were waived. On TV, one prominent commentator said people who do not vote are traitors, and Al-Azhar said failure to vote is to disobey the nation. Frontrunner former Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi faces only one challenger in the election, leftist Hamdin Sabbahi. Sisi's supporters see him as a decisive figure who can steer Egypt out of 3 years of turmoil. His priorities are fighting Islamist militants who have taken up arms since the removal of Mohamed Morsi and reviving the economy battered by turmoil that has driven away tourists and investors. And over to Iraq, where a suicide bomber killed at least 19 people in the middle of noon prayer inside a Shiite mosque in central Baghdad. The explosion in Awatba Square also injured at least 36 people. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. Most of the victims were merchants and shopkeepers who have gone to pray. Hospital sources said the death toll was likely to rise due to the severity of the injuries. Nigeria's military said it knows the location of the more than 200 schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram in April. But officials think any raid to rescue them would be fraught with danger and probably not worth the risk that the girls would be killed by their captors. Since the girls were captured 7 weeks ago, nearly 500 civilians have been killed by Boko Haram, which says it is fighting to establish an Islamic state. In Tehran, meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader condemned the actions of Boko Haram of abducting the schoolgirls in Nigeria. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said such acts were carried out by people who did not have a proper understanding of the Quran, adding that the message of Islam has not become clear to some Muslims. He also spoke out against divisions in the Muslim world where tensions are high. He said in the Islamic world today, oppressive systems raise differences among Muslims in order to hide their own problems, to reach their own oppressive aims. Khamenei was speaking on the occasion of Eid al-Mab'ath, which marks the day Muslims believe the angel Gabriel descended from heaven and imparted the first verses of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. Stunning gains by anti-EU and populist parties in the European Parliament elections will prevent any new treaty on deeper Eurozone integration for the foreseeable future and may tilt Europe's economic policy mix more towards expansion. 28 European Union leaders met in Brussels this afternoon to digest the results of a widespread vote.
It's been called an earthquake. Europe's leaders are measuring the aftershock and how to limit it. UK Prime Minister David Cameron says there can be no more business as usual, as does Marine Le Pen of the National Front, who now leads the biggest French party in Europe's Parliament.
We demand an immediate moratorium on European construction. No more advances towards European federalism can take place. We are here to ban all developments in that direction.
From the incumbents, a promise to improve. President Hollande of France is speaking of a new emphasis on jobs and investment, less on austerity. Angela Merkel of Germany also talks of growth and of more competitiveness. And Italy's Matteo Renzi is vowing to press for fewer budgetary controls to allow more public spending. James Ashley of RBC Capital Markets.
The general direction for the core policies will be one of further integration, deeper integration on things like economic and monetary union. But I think there are some areas where I think, frankly, politicians are going to have to pare back the scope of the EU in order to reflect the will of the people, which has very clearly been expressed in these elections.
Reform is the answer, says Charles Stanley chief economist Jeremy Batson-Carr, though that has its own dangers.
With reform will come change, will potentially result in a very slow pace of reduction in unemployment. And of course, as regional unemployment stays high around the region, it's highly likely that anti-establishment parties will continue to do well.
The EU faces internal dilemmas too, like who should be the next European Commission president. Luxembourg's former Prime Minister Jean-Claude Juncker was tipped, but his staunch federalism is opposed by Cameron and others, and even Merkel, one of his main backers, appears more guarded in her support. With nearly a third of the seats going to extreme parties in the European Parliament, the landscape has changed. So could the hard right and the hard left be here to stay? Michael Hewson of CMC Markets.
I certainly think that could well be the case, especially if unemployment fails to come down and growth continues to be very, very hard won.
As for the presidency, critics say it's very much business as usual. Negotiations for the top job expected to take weeks, if not months, to conclude.
Ukraine's Interior Ministry said the military is now in full control of the airport in the eastern city of Donetsk after a day of bloody clashes. But fighting between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian troops continued in and around the city airport for a second day. After the Ukrainian military inflicted heavy losses on the rebels, locals headed to a blood donation center in the city. Pro-Russian rebels said more than 50 of their fighters have been killed so far. The mayor of Donetsk, an industrial hub in eastern Ukraine, said the death toll in the clashes, which erupted yesterday, stood at 40, including 2 civilians. Malaysia's government and British satellite firm Inmarsat released data used to determine the path of missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, responding to a clamor from passengers' relatives for greater transparency. The data features network log-on confirmations after the aircraft disappeared from civilian radar screens on March 18th. Based on Inmarsat's and other investigators' analysis of the data, the aircraft is believed to have gone down in the Indian Ocean off Western Australia. In the hours after the aircraft disappeared, an Inmarsat satellite picked up a handful of handshake pings, indicating the plane continued flying for hours after leaving radar. The new information is expected to help narrow the search to an area off the Indian Ocean. The data also featured 2 telephone calls that were made by Malaysia Airlines from the ground and went unanswered by the plane. Calculations based on the new data indicate the jetliner likely went down in the remote ocean 7 to 8 hours after its communications were cut off as it headed to Beijing. Broken bones and bruises were order of the day as hundreds of people took part in the annual ancient cheese rolling competition in Gloucestershire, England. Participants thundered down a steepy hill in a bid to become the first to catch a rolling wheel of cheese. Last year, in a bid to make the race safer, revelers had to chase a foam imitation of the cheese, but this year the fake cheese was binned in favor of a real wheel of cheese weighing 3.5 kilograms. The cheese rolling tradition dates back to at least the early 19th century. AC Milan are set to fire Dutch coach Clarence Seedorf and replace him with youth team coach Filippo Inzaghi, the Italian media reported. Though Seedorf is only 4 months into a 2.5-year contract and has overseen a considerable improvement in results, rumors about his future have been rife for several weeks. 38-year-old Seedorf, who spent 10 years of his playing career at Milan, had no previous coaching experience when appointed, but Milan results improved markedly under him with 11 wins in 19 league games. However, they also suffered an embarrassing exit from the Champions League after losing 5-1 on aggregate to Atletico Madrid in the round of 16. Similar to Seedorf, Inzaghi has no previous experience of coaching a senior professional team. An Australian street luge racer is gearing up to set a new world record with a jet-powered version of his mode of transport. Das Fellows wants to get his name in the Guinness World Record books with 2 mini jet turbines attached to his street luge, which he hopes will power him to a top speed of 500 kilometers an hour. The current record is 186.4 kilometers an hour, set by Englishman Jason Bradbury in 2011. The record attempt is due to take place sometime between April and August next year, either in Australia or the US. And finally, fair weather continues tonight with southwesterly light winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, creating moderate weather in hilly areas, but relatively hot in the Jordan Valley. Winds will be southwesterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in the desert areas. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect moderate conditions tonight, but hot tomorrow, with northerly moderate to fresh winds and slightly choppy seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King meets with leaders and representatives of the World Orthodox Churches in Jordan to convene a historic meeting and hold a prayer for peace at the baptism site. Rival Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas agree on the makeup of a national unity government, and the Palestinian president will make a formal announcement of the new government later this week. And Egypt's presidential election was extended by a day in an effort to boost lower than expected turnout that threatened to undermine the credibility of frontrunner Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tuqan. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.